I'm Geoffrey Villehardouin. I have finally fixed my computer and laptop. They both broke down at about the same time, within weeks of each other. And therefore I had to stop doing posting my replays for the Kingdoms Crusades campaign and my For King and Country campaign. Now, hopefully I will resume those. In the meantime, my modem computer was still working. This is a computer from 2012. Still working very well. I'm never connected to the internet. And I don't know if that has anything to do with it. Maybe the quality of craftsmanship was better in those days. So since I had my modem computer working, I went back to the 1648 mod that I had worked quite a bit on. And I had I worked very much on the campaign and battle AIs that were based on AIs by other modders that I just adapted them for the mode. And I had worked on a few other things, the EDU and a few other things, the pricing of the units. At that time I had to give up because at the same time we had started working on the newest version of Brockney Crescent, which in the end the team disbanded, and Pastime Boy released his own version without contributions from the rest of us. The unfortunate thing was that it was a very bad timing for me. Around 2014, thereabouts, 2015, with work crisis, I had to move to America and work very, very hard. It's just impossible to work on both mods. Now, the 1648 mod had been finished by then, but I was working on my Invita submod, which I had to stop work on and just release what I could. The campaign initially had 123. The game, or the sub mod, the mod, the 1648 mod had originally 123 portraits for generals and small numbers of portraits for the other types of characters. When we finally released a patch for the final version, I think that patch might be now part of the official release. That had 200 portraits for the generals. Still, there were not enough. You have to imagine you can just create generals. You can hire them in certain type of barracks. You can make the generals. And there were many factions and many settlements, and you end up with hundreds and hundreds of generals. So there were far too many duplicates, even with a 200 portraits. So, and in Vita, I had introduced 400 portraits, and among other changes, I had added quotes from Robert Monro, who was a mercenary soldier who fought in the army of Gustavus Adolphus. Initially, he was hired by the Danish and then by Gustavus Adolphus. He was part of the Scottish regiment under Gustavus Adolphus, rose to the rank of major, and eventually became vice commander of the regiment, which was very badly mauled in the Battle of Lutzen, and basically had to disband. Just a few people were left from the regiment. It was just the survivors eventually found their way back to Scotland. And he published the memoirs of his campaign in the army of Gustavus Adolphus, which had wonderful descriptions and wonderful quotes. So I had added some of his quotes, and the list of quotes, at least they were from this period, because many of the quotes we had were German quotes, sometimes not even translated from later periods, from Karl Marx and Bismarck, and it's from centuries later. And so I decided to add Robert Monro's codes, which were from the period. The third change was a very small change that I made for some of the named generals. There were a few named generals that didn't have their actual portraits, historical portraits, so I changed those. So they had the historical portraits. So that was Invita. It was savegame compatible. So while I was with my two computers under repair, I have been working on an upgrade of Invita. People had asked for upgrades, for an upgrade, and our argument was that the game works perfectly well, and so there's no need for updates or upgrades. However, there were a few reasons why these requests were justified. Among them was that that there were the historical battles that had worked in the very original version of the mod, not 1648 version 2, the original one, version 1. The historical battles had worked seamlessly, and all the historical events, the various pop-ups and so on, were all working seamlessly. They were working perfectly. With 1648_2, we didn't realize it immediately. Only we realized after we started playing all the factions and testing, and it took us some time, and the mod had been already released. It took us some time to realize that most of the historical battles were not working. Some were not working at all for some factions. Some were working for some of the factions, but not all of them. Austria and the Palatinate are the least buggy. Basically, I think no historical battles work for any other faction. So that is an unfortunate problem that has to do with the scripting, and I didn't want to change the script. That would be something for Gigantus to do if he wanted, and he couldn't figure out. I've discussed it briefly. He couldn't figure out why, since they were working originally, why they're not working anymore. And we left it at that. Gigantus is a very busy fellow, so unfortunately, that problem, we're aware of it, remains unresolved. The second problem was that there were crashes caused by the portraits late in the campaign. So from around game turn 100 onward, you start getting crashes, and you see a multiplicity of portraits appearing on the screen. That I figured out what was causing it, at least partially. Some of those crashes will still happen, but part of the reason that was happening was that there was no priests subfolder in the UI section. So we had Catholic priests and Protestant priests, but we don't have a standard priest subfolder. Now, the priest subfolder would not be used. So you either get portraits for the Catholic factions from the Catholic portraits, or for the Protestant factions from the Protestant portraits. You would never get to use the standard priest or a priest subfolder files or portraits from that subfolder. However, it is important that such a subfolder exists in the game, period specific, kind of. Otherwise, the game will crash. For some reason, I don't understand it. It searches occasionally. It gets buggy when searching for the portraits late in the campaign. So it searches for portraits. It cannot find a priest file. Maybe it needs to look for that first, and then look at something else. I'm not sure what the issue really is, but if it doesn't find a priest folder in the game folders, then it defaults to the original game, the medieval 2 portraits. Those priests there, the colorful sort of medieval bishops you see there, and they seem to cause crashes. They will not always crash, But the more often it searches and it cannot find a pre-sub folder, the more often the crashes happen, and the more portraits there are, the more often it searches for that, and so exponentially increases the crashes as the campaign progresses. So that's easy to fix. You just have to add a priest folder with enough portraits in the UI section, and that fixes it. It doesn't fix it 100%, but it fixes it like 99%. Okay, so that is something that I have discovered. Then I may release an Invita upgrade of my submod. I will have these additional new changes. The other thing that keeps bothering me is that Monty Moguniakun, who was the main, he was the inspiration, the main driver for the mod. We had a huge team at the time, especially the guy who did the portraits. It was amazing. Not the portraits, the units, the unit skins. There was one guy who did all the unit skins, all of them unique. He was just amazing. He did an enormous amount of work. In any case, so there were many others who were involved. They contributed historical details, but the main driver was Monty, or Moguli Akum, and he wrote all the German text, which is enough to fill a book. And then at some point, he asked if someone could translate it. That someone would have been me, but I was so extremely busy with Broken Crescent, all sorts of real life. I could not. It was just impossible. I could not do it. And so he made the best effort he could, a very valiant effort. But basically, he was very often seems using a very primitive version of Google Translate that was available at the time. And that was really very primitive. And so some of the translations are not very good. Some make absolutely no sense. So I'll start by showing you some of the problems. Actually, I don't have, this is the version I'm working on, so it actually has corrected these things. But if you have your older version, let's have a look. Let's have a look at the settlement here. If you have your older version, the one you're using, where on earth is it? Have I built it already? Here. You can search for this, the drainage, and you try to read it, and you'll be very hard pressed to understand what it's saying. It's translated directly from German. It is almost inscrutable. This is another one, the crop rotation. Parts of it would be readable, obviously, but there was something here about how the crop rotation was working and how the land was divided into 3 parts and so on. It made no sense. The translation, the Google translation from German to English was inscrutable. You couldn't figure out what was the idea. And so I made this change. Also at the bottom, I've added some details about what does this building do for you in practical terms, in game terms. So this is farming level 3. This is farming level 2. There's also some information here, population growth bonus, minus 1.5. You think, oh, that's weird. You build an agricultural building, and then you get minus 0.1, minus 0.2%. That makes no sense. Well, that's not how it works. How it works is you get already from the crop rotation, which says plus 3, you get 3% bonus in growth. So that's minus 2%. So overall, you get 1% growth. And from this other building, you get what's level. Come on. Why it doesn't work now? Here you get 2, farm level 2. Here you get 2% bonus and population growth minus 1.5. This is what is going on. So it's clear to you. So you get 0.5% bonus in growth. And there is a reason for that, because at 2% growth, the settlements are already quite big. And with a 2% or 3% growth, you end up with plague in every settlement by game turn 150 or so. And it's a real pain to get rid of the plague. It's almost impossible because the population keeps growing. As soon as the plague is over, then population starts growing at a very fast rate, and then you have plague again and plague. And there are buildings to counter the plague. There's various buildings that improve the health of the settlement. So there are some, here the hospital, for example, if I could trigger it. Public health bonus 20%, there are various other ones. There are buildings you can build to improve the public health of the settlement, but there are also events that decrease the public health of the settlement, and then plague strikes because the populations are so high. And so this is why we have this minus 1.5 you saw in minus 2. In fact, it is a positive growth. It's just not as fast as it would have been otherwise. So don't be confused by the minus 0.1, minus 1.5 and minus 2%. You have population growth when you build those agricultural buildings, whatever I call them. So why was I saying this? We started saying because the descriptions were inscrutable. Sometimes the German descriptions remain, like some of the codes were untranslated, still in German and so on. So I've been working on lots of those things. I've been working on the unit descriptions, on building descriptions, on all kinds of things like that. I could potentially make these changes in subsections, so you can just change the English if you're bothered, but not change the English if you're not. Have some additional portraits, for example. You can upload the additional portraits if you want, not if you don't. I think you should make the change with a priest folder to reduce crashes. It will reduce crashes significantly. So these are the three changes, main changes that I have been working on. There are some new portraits, very few new portraits, mostly historical, but also made a couple of AI portraits, but only very, very few, to replace some portraits that I didn't really like. The portraits are from the period, obviously. I also made portraits for the ancillaries. So let's just, I'm doing this campaign. I'm at the end of this game turn 91. I've already won the campaign. To win the campaign, you need 20 cities for the short campaign. I have 26. It was won at game 1070 or so. So I'm just fooling around because I want to just check all the things, the English and the various events and so on, the units. And so I'm just kind of fooling around with the campaign. But let's go over to the next game turn because this game turn is over. And then I will show you a couple of other things that I'm working on. Apologies, my hard disk became full and the computer crashed. Not just my campaign. So before continuing my what I was saying about the changes, the additional last few changes that I made, let's just have a look while we're at it at the faction of Cologne, since we have to start all over again. And here's the faction. So Ferdinand of Bavaria is the leader of the faction. We added this faction in the latest version of the mod. It wasn't in the original 1648 mod, the German version. It, as a faction, was then a part of the Catholic League, so it wasn't a separate faction. But since the Electorate of Cologne was one of the 7 electors of the Holy Roman Empire, the decision was made to add a faction to the game. And so the faction is based in Bonn rather than Cologne. In fact, it doesn't have control of Cologne, which you may think is strange. What actually happened was that a little bit before the start of the 30 Years' War, the city of Cologne went Protestant, and they elected their own religious leader, and so the archbishop had to leave Cologne, and he settled in Bonn. So that's the explanation, and eventually he was replaced by a member of the Wittelsbach family, were the Bavarian ruling family. So I'm not sure, can't remember if it was a brother or cousin or something of the Duke of Bavaria, this chap, but Ferdinand of Bavaria is of the same family. And so then the Wittelsbach family had two electors, and among, if I'm not mistaken, the Bavarian Duke was also an elector, and so that makes two members of the same family being among the 7 electors. In any case, so let's go back to my campaign rather than start a new one. Hopefully there will be no crashes. Oh, there will be crashes. I have a feeling the campaign was not saved correctly. Well, I have a feeling something was not saved correctly. Never mind. It looks like it's working at the moment because the computer crashed. I'm a little bit worried. Just for the sake of just explaining the few things that I wanted to explain. So let's have a look at some of the other changes. So I was saying something about the ancillaries. So previously we had medieval looking ancillaries for things like academic advisor or librarian, or some medieval characters. There were some wizards and things like that. I still have left the medieval alchemist, but I replaced the portraits with portraits from this period. So academic advisor gets a portrait from the period of the 30 Years' War, the librarian, drill master, brilliant scribe. The inventor is a portrait of Otto von Guericke. He was a scientist who lived at the time. He was after Magdeburg was restored. He helped in the rebuilding of Magdeburg. He was the most important, perhaps, scientist worldwide at this time. It predated Newton. He wrote a collection of books similar to Newton's Principia Mathematica, and it wasn't the same style. Possibly Newton was inspired by his books to write Principia. And he described various things like electricity, magnetism, and so on. He made several inventions himself. Among them was a pump with which he would create vacuum inside a sphere. It is the same pump we're using today to pump bicycles, the tires of bicycles, for example, but it works in the opposite direction. Rather than pumping air out, it pumps air in. Our modern pumps tend to pump air in rather than out. But it was the same principle. He was the inventor of that. So I thought there's no better potential portrait for an inventor than one of Otto von Guericke. There is a museum dedicated to him in Magdeburg, and a biography. And the same is true for some of the other characters. So sword bearer, mercenary captain. So they get images from characters from the period of the 30 Years' War. Same is true about some of the portraits. There's some new portraits for Catholic priests, because when I had made the original Invita mod, I couldn't find any good portraits, so I made some new ones. The majority of them are of Cardinal Richelieu. So this is Richelieu, and several of the other portraits are Richelieu. So it's very popular among portrait painters, I suppose. This is Richelieu. Sorry, this one. But there are some additional portraits now. In any case, and they get the original ancillaries, I think, mostly. Can't remember. Most original ancillaries, but some of the other characters get new ancillaries. Let's have a look at them. Yeah, this guy gets a counterfighter as an ancillary from the period. Counterfighter and merchant clerk. Most of these portraits are of the period from paintings, the period of the 30 Years' War by painters, portrait painters of the time. Okay, and then let's go over to the diplomats. The portraits for the merchants were mostly real portraits. This is Rembrandt, but the majority of them were real portraits of gentlemen. So we have very often something like portrait of a gentleman. Well, these gentlemen mostly were wealthy people, so most likely merchants or similar administrative people, perhaps. So they became merchants. They gave their portraits to merchant portraits. Wealthier characters like this one, very often these were named. There were real characters, very often noblemen or princes or kings. Here's, for example, Gustavus. They gave them their portraits to diplomats. And so they get different ancillaries. So they get, this one gets a translator and a foreign dignitary. I'll make tutorials to explain how you get these ancillaries. So I'll make some in the future. I'll make several tutorials. Yes, this one gets a diplomatic escort. Before you had a medieval, some sort of medieval soldier or something, but now you get a portrait from this period. Swift steed was the head of a horse, very, very nice. But, foreign dignitary and so on. So, and then the rogues. The rogues were mostly portraits from the period of actors or artists or painters themselves, or self-portraits. Some of these are self-portraits of painters. Can you remember which ones? This, I think, is a painter from the period, and a few of the other ones are painters. Here's a musician, and here's an actor. This is a painter. It's a real portrait from the period. It's not AI generated. It's a painter. And here's another painter from the period, self-portrait. And here's the son. Here's the son of Rembrandt. A portrait of his son, dressed up as a monk. And some of the other ones, I think, this guy is also a painter, self-portrait. So that was the rationale behind making those portraits, and you see the new ancillaries. So the new ancillaries is one of the things that I've been working on, images for the new ancillaries. Another thing that you would see sometimes is that if you clicked on an admiral, let's find a ship here. So here's a ship. If you clicked on the ship, you get a portrait of the admiral. The majority of, all of them were original portraits from medieval too. Unfortunately, since some of the factions in medieval II were Muslim factions, like Egypt or the Turks and so on, then you would get, or Mongols even, I think, then you would get their captain portraits. So you get Saracen portraits or Turkish or whatever, as for some of the factions. So Mainz would get, I don't know if we have a Mainz ship anywhere to check. But Mainz was one of those problematic factions where you get an Islamic character portrait for your admiral if you clicked on the ship. I can't see any Mainz ships. In any case, I've changed it now. And so they're no longer, these factions no longer get Islamic captain portraits as their admirals. So that is one of the other changes. Changed how some traits or ancillaries get triggered, because some of the triggers would never work in this mod. So I changed them so that this these traits from cities can't be triggered. So in this version, you tend to have more traits and ancillaries for your characters. And it was especially the case that some good traits and interesting ancillaries would not get triggered. So I thought too many characters descended into drunkenness and so on. And gambling and impiety and all sorts of things. And it was very annoying because we start with some characters, and instead of them becoming better over time, they get worse and worse. Your starting characters is sometimes frustrating. So they will tend to get better overall. They will get bad traits still. It's not that only the new traits and ancillaries are all good. And it's not new. Original ones, it just wouldn't get triggered. They would get triggered, and by such conditions, that would not really happen. Okay. As I said, the other maybe last thing that I made, these things can be perhaps uploaded separately. I made just one small change. Let's have a look at one of the settlements. So here you get these buildings are called Bell Foundry, and the next level up would be Cannon Foundry, and the next level up would be a Royal Arsenal. Where would it be? No. Where are they? In this place. Why don't I see it? Well, it might be like cannons, because I haven't built any. Now here, originally, you would get an image of a landscape painting by a Dutch artist, who it was like a bird-eye view of Holland, or part of Holland, with various buildings, and there was a factory in the middle, but it was like a tiny, tiny thing that has a chimney. And that was presumably a foundry, and the painting was called Foundry. And presumably it was a cannon foundry. But then there was a red building somewhere, painted red. It was weird. And it was like huge landscape picture with lots of fields and the sea and all kinds of things. And that was the image for the cannon foundry, for example. I thought, I didn't quite like it. It also was a little bit buggy. It didn't work. Something was buggy about it. I can't remember what. The image, one of these images was buggy. And so I changed it. I have this image now. And this is the thumbnail of it. Here on the right. And then for the ship cannons, the Royal Arsenal, Artillery Arsenal, then you get ships. They'll give you ship cannons. It gives you this demi-coloring, which was a ship cannon. It was also used in sieges. Culverins and proper cannons were ship cannons. These other ones, falconets and sakers and some other types which are not in the game, were field artillery. Demi-culverin weighed about 2 tons. It was extremely difficult to move, you can imagine. You needed a team of 18 horses to move it. But you could potentially move it and use it in a battle. They were mostly placed on walls of fortifications for sieges, and vice versa. By the besieging army was sometimes set up to break down walls. Walls were almost indestructible in this period of warfare. There was no single case where an army was able to storm a city after the wall was taken down, if it was a Starfort wall. In Magdeburg, they stormed the city, so Tilly took the city by storm, but only after destroying a part of the medieval wall, which was on the side of the river. There was no proper Starfort fortifications. The fortifications of Magdeburg were just amazing. The fortified area, the fortifications themselves were as big as a surface area as the city itself. It had massive fortifications. You think it's unthinkable that this place would be conquered. But Tilly found out that on the side of the river, there were only medieval fortifications. There was no room for start fort fortifications. And although there were start ravelings across the river, he was able to take those and then break down the medieval walls. And unfortunately, the Magdeburgers hadn't taken down their bridge over the river, so he was able to send his troops over the bridge into the breach that he had made to the medieval walls. And that was the only case during the 30 Years' War, 30 years of warfare, where a start fort was stormed. What's this city? Stralsund. Stralsund, which is here. Stralsund was besieged for over a year and couldn't be taken. It was besieged by Wallenstein. He brought all his cannons and everything he could. He managed to breach a little bit of a wall at one point, but by that time, the defenders had set up additional sort of walls behind the front wall. And so he wasn't able to take the city. So it was impossible to take the city by storm. Breda was taken somewhere here in Belgium. Where is Breda? Somewhere. Where is Belgium? Somewhere here is Breda. It's a thing, one of some here. You cannot see it. Let's take off the fog of war. Breda was taken after a siege of over a year. 14 months, I think, Breda. But it was only taken after digging a tunnel underneath the start fort walls and loading it with explosives. And when the defenders found out, they surrendered. So Breda would have had a start fort wall, sort of fortification as well. So these are the changes that I'm working on, that was one last little change. The images for the kind of foundries. The other thing that I want to make about this mod is make some tutorials about the depreciation, the currency depreciation, for example, about how the merchant trade deteriorates over the period of the campaign, and what you can do about it. I will describe something about the guilds, perhaps how the guilds work, how you can get guilds, how the supply wagons work. That's probably unclear. They have been unclear even for me at the beginning. I expect it is unclear to many people how the supply wagons work. I've made some tutorials in Total War Center, but I'll make some videos perhaps. I'll say a few things about the campaign difficulty levels, what is different among different difficulty levels. So I may make tutorials about those things, little videos that will describe some of these aspects of the game. Until then, thank you for watching my video. I hope it was helpful. We'll hopefully finalize some version of my Invita update and then post it on ModDB. I may post it in bits and pieces so you can just select which aspect of it you want to download and use. All the changes in the Invita submod are savegame compatible, so you can continue with your campaign. You just have improved English or something like that. Nothing will change in terms of how your campaign works. So until the next installment, thank you for watching.